Elvis was halfway through the song when he saw it. Not waved, not raised, just sitting there, heavy and unmistakable on the small round table in the front row. A pistol placed so casually it felt intentional. The man beside it did not clap or smile. He did not look impressed or bored. He looked like someone waiting for a signal. The band kept playing, smooth and loud enough to drown out thought, and the audience kept doing what audiences do when they sense danger but cannot name it. They smiled harder. Elvis let the lyrics stretch, just long enough to be noticed, and looked straight into the dark suits below him. In that moment, the room did not belong to the crowd. It chose sides. From the outside, the International was glamour and light, a palace of sound and sweat and screaming fans. Inside the business, it was something else entirely. Las Vegas in this era was not run by brochures or billboards. It was run by quiet men with louder leverage. The hotels, the shows, the contracts, all of it moved through hands that never appeared on stage. Elvis knew that when he signed on. He knew the money that rebuilt his career did not come without expectations. You sang, you smiled, you stayed useful, and you did not confuse fame with power. Elvis was useful. He filled rooms night after night. He made the hotel more money than any chandelier or craps table ever could. That bought him privileges, but it did not buy immunity. Privileges could be revoked. Immunity could not be earned. What made it worse was that Elvis was not built to fold quietly. On stage, he lived in a space where eyes followed him without question, where control came from rhythm and timing and nerve. He had learned, long before Vegas, that hesitation invited pressure. Confidence did not eliminate danger, but it changed how danger behaved. That night, under the spotlight, he felt the balance shift. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The sense that someone had decided this was the moment to test what he thought he owned. When the song ended, the applause came late and uneven. Elvis smiled, thanked the crowd, and walked off stage with the same loose stride he always used. Backstage, before the sweat cooled on his collar, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not rushed, just certain. The knock from earlier had a follow-up. It came as Elvis was toweling off, the mirror still fogged, the adrenaline of the set barely settled. A man stepped into the hallway outside the dressing room with the kind of suit that never wrinkled and never drew attention, which was exactly the point. He did not ask to come in. He did not need to. He smiled and spoke softly, like he was passing along a courtesy. The boss would like a word after the show. Just a few minutes. Private. No name, no explanation, no threat that could be quoted later. Colonel Parker heard it and went still. His face did that thing it did when he was running numbers in his head, and none of them came out clean. The band, still half-dressed, went quiet too. These men all knew the same stories. Who financed which hotel? Who disappeared after confusing popularity with leverage? Vegas ran on memory, and this kind of request came with a long one. Elvis listened without interrupting. He nodded, thanked the man for stopping by, and said he was exhausted after shows these days. Maybe another time. He said it the way someone might decline pie, friendly and final. The messenger did not frown or raise his voice. He just smiled wider, like a tailor checking seams, and said he would pass that along. When the door closed, the room filled with breath again. Colonel started talking fast, suggesting schedules, misunderstandings, anything that could soften the edges. Elvis waved him off and reached for a drink. He had spent his life being told when to move and where to stand. The stage was the one place that belonged to him, and he was not about to let someone summon him like hired help. He headed toward the stage door to cool down, thinking the moment had passed. It had not. The same man was waiting near the corridor, hands folded, posture unchanged. He did not block the path. He did not need to. He leaned in just enough that only Elvis could hear him. The boss does not like being told, maybe. That was all. The words were calm, almost apologetic, but they landed heavier than anything shouted. Elvis held the man's eyes for a beat, nodded once, and walked past him. He kept his stride loose, his shoulders relaxed, the way he always did when a room was watching. Behind him, the corridor felt narrower than it had a moment before. The second time the messenger came, the courtesy was gone. He appeared near the dressing rooms, like he had always been there. Standing closer than before, voice lowered enough to make it clear this was no longer a suggestion. Elvis was lacing his boots when he heard him speak, and instead of turning, he cracked a joke about working late and needing overtime pay. It was the kind of line that usually loosened a room. This time, it landed wrong. The small burst of laughter from a crew member died almost immediately, swallowed by the man's stare. Colonel Parker stepped forward fast, all smiles and motion, talking about tight schedules and early call times, offering explanations that sounded reasonable but carried no weight. The messenger listened, nodded once, and cut him off with a single sentence. "The boss is downstairs. He is waiting now." The word "now" did more work than a threat ever could. By then, the hallway felt different. Conversations stopped when Elvis walked past. Hotel staff who normally hovered suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. The rumors that had been floating turned solid, pieced together in whispers that followed him like smoke. A dancer from another room. A comment taken the wrong way. Someone powerful deciding Elvis had crossed a line without knowing it existed. None of it was clear. None of it mattered. In this town, belief outranked truth. Elvis refused again. He said he would not chase a meeting like a scared employee summoned on command. He said it calmly, without raising his voice, which somehow made it worse. The messenger's jaw tightened. He did not argue. He did not threaten. He simply looked at Elvis like someone updating a file, then turned and walked away. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Later that night, as the band packed up, a security man Elvis recognized pulled one of the guitar players aside. His voice was barely audible, but the message traveled fast. The front tables for tomorrow night had been bought out. Not reserved. Bought. Every seat. No fans. No tourists. Just suits. Elvis heard it and felt something click into place. This was not about a conversation anymore. It was about a public lesson. He looked around at his people, saw the fear they were trying to hide, and realized the exits were closing one by one. Tomorrow night was no longer just another show. The day of the show arrived with a pressure you could feel before anything went wrong. The international buzzed the way it always did, but underneath it ran a nervous current. Too many men standing still, too many conversations ending when someone walked by. Security radios whispered instead of crackled. Doors that were usually propped open stayed shut. Even the air backstage felt heavier, like the building itself was listening. Elvis warmed up in his dressing room, running scales, rolling his shoulders loose, doing everything he had done 1,000 times before. Colonel Parker hovered nearby, talking in circles, promising that everything would be fine, that misunderstandings blew over, that Vegas ran on smiles and handshakes. The words sounded rehearsed, not believed. Elvis nodded, let him talk, and kept his focus where it belonged. If he showed nerves now, they would smell it. Then the final confirmation came. A stage manager leaned in, voice tight, and told them the front rows were full. Not fans, not tourists, wall-to-wall suits. The boss and his people, close enough to touch the stage, close enough that every move would be read as an answer. Colonel stopped talking. For the first time all day, there was nothing left to negotiate. When Elvis walked out, the lights hit him like always, bright and blinding, the roar of the crowd swelling on cue. For a few moments, it almost worked. The familiar faces, the cheers, the opening bars of a crowd-pleaser washing over the room. He moved the way he always did, loose and confident, giving them the show they paid for. Applause came in waves, but there was a dead space at the front that swallowed sound. He saw them clearly now. The boss sat dead center, broad shoulders filling the chair, eyes locked on the stage. No smile, no movement, just waiting. The men around him watched Elvis like referees, not spectators. Elvis finished the song, grinned, and tipped his head. The room exhaled. Then the boss raised his hand. Slow. Deliberate. A single finger drawn across his throat, never breaking eye contact. The gesture rippled outward. A gasp here. A stiff laugh there. The band faltered for half a beat before recovering, playing on out of instinct more than comfort. Elvis felt the heat of the lights, the weight of the silence pressing in behind the music. This was no longer private pressure or hallway warnings. This was a message delivered in front of everyone, and now the room was waiting to see what he would do with it. The music wavered, just slightly, the kind of hesitation only musicians noticed, and then it steadied again. The room did not. Every face in the audience was turned toward the front row now, toward the man who had made the threat impossible to ignore. This was no longer something that could be handled later or quietly smoothed over backstage. Whatever happened next would happen in front of everyone. Elvis felt the silence press in and did not step back from it. He smiled instead. Not a nervous smile, not a forced one, but the same easy grin he used when he owned a room. He walked to the edge of the stage, close enough that the front row could see the sweat on his collar, and let his eyes settle on the boss. The band held, waiting for a cue. The audience barely breathed. "Well," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice calm and amused, It looks like we've got ourselves a serious critic tonight." A few nervous laughs flickered and died. He did not rush them. "I like honest feedback," he continued. "Keeps a man sharp. So I want to dedicate this next one to the gentleman up front, who's keeping everyone on their toes." He gestured lightly toward the boss, turning the attention into a spotlight that could not be shrugged off. Then he did something no one expected. He leaned down, extended the microphone toward the front row, and tilted his head. "Or," Elvis said, "if you'd rather help me run the show, you're welcome to come up here and do it yourself." The room locked solid. This was the moment where things broke one way or another. Violence would shatter the illusion of control the boss lived on. Silence would make him look small. The pause stretched, long enough to hurt, long enough that the audience started to understand how thin the line really was. Then the boss laughed. It was not warm, but it was real. He lifted his glass in a slow, deliberate toast, eyes never leaving Elvis, and gave a small wave of his hand. "Keep singing." The release hit the room like a wave. Applause burst out, messy and relieved, and the band came crashing back in. Elvis straightened, nodded once, and launched into the song like nothing had happened. After the show, alone in the dressing room, the boss finally spoke plainly. It had never been about blood. It had been about respect, about not being made to look weak. Elvis listened, poured a drink, and did not apologize for standing his ground. When the boss left, Elvis stayed where he was, calm and unshaken. The room, the stage, the night, they were still his, and everyone in the building knew it. By sunrise, the story had escaped the building and started mutating. It moved through coffee shops, newsrooms, and casino floors with the speed of something people wanted to believe. Each version came back sharper than the last. Elvis had stared down a gun. Elvis had kicked a chair aside. Elvis had nearly been dragged off the stage. None of it was true, but truth never traveled as fast as adrenaline. In Las Vegas, stories were currency, and this one was suddenly valuable. Colonel Parker spent the morning trying to buy silence with phone calls and favors. He leaned on hotel executives, smoothed over staff, reminded people who needed reminding that exaggerated stories invited the wrong kind of interest. The problem was that interest was already awake. Rival crews listened closely to anything that hinted at weakness or disrespect. Federal eyes cataloged incidents like this the way accountants tracked losses. A legend did not just make Elvis look brave. It made him visible. Elvis watched it unfold with the same calm he carried on stage. He read headlines that did not exist yet in whispers and half smiles. He told people to relax. He said stories burned themselves out. But the people around him felt the shift immediately. Doors that once swung open now paused before opening. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when he passed. It was subtle, but it was there. The building had new rules overnight, and nobody had bothered to print them. What worried Colonel most was not the noise. It was the quiet underneath it. The boss had not called. There was no message, no follow-up, no denial. In this town, silence was never empty. It meant something was being decided. Late in the afternoon, a hotel executive pulled Colonel aside near the elevators. His voice was low and careful, the way people spoke when they did not want to be quoted later. He said the boss had heard the stories and did not like them. Not because they made Elvis look strong, but because they made him look reckless. The kind of reckless that forced other people to respond. "He is not finished with Elvis," the executive said. "Not tonight. Not on stage. Something else." Colonel felt the weight of that settle in his chest. Public confrontations had rules. Private ones did not. He found Elvis a few minutes later and tried to explain without saying too much. Elvis listened, nodded once, and said nothing. The story had already grown beyond the truth, and that made whatever came next harder to see coming. Elvis understood something most people never did. When you stood up to a powerful man and walked away intact, you did not return to normal. You became part of that man's story, whether you liked it or not. Survival was not the end of it. Survival was the beginning of a new equation. From that night forward, Elvis was no longer just the headliner filling seats. He was a variable that had to be accounted for. He made that clear without speeches or warnings. The stage stayed his territory, always. Decisions about songs, pacing, jokes, and silences belonged to him the moment the lights came up. He did not challenge anyone directly, and he did not flaunt what he had done. He simply behaved like a man who would not be moved. In Las Vegas, that kind of consistency spoke louder than threats. People noticed. They adjusted. The months that followed were loud in all the usual ways, and quiet where it mattered. No more messengers appearing unannounced. No more casual tests disguised as favors. The boundary had been set, not with violence or bravado, but with nerve and timing. It was the kind of line you did not cross because you could not explain what would happen if you did. Those were the lines that lasted. The story, of course, refused to stay